Do you still believe in the American dream? For decades, it was a phrase that carried enormous weight, symbolizing the promise that anyone, regardless of where they came from, could rise through hard work and determination. But as we look around the United States today, that dream feels increasingly fragile, even broken in many places. Families that once thrived in stable communities are now struggling to make ends meet. Entire neighborhoods are facing rising poverty, declining populations, and mounting homelessness. In this investigation, we'll take a deep look at 10 states where the harsh realities of economic decline, soaring living costs, and shrinking opportunities are reshaping the future. Some of these examples may be shocking, others heartbreaking, but all of them point to a troubling pattern. Let's begin in Alaska, a state that evokes images of unspoiled beauty, rugged mountains, and endless wilderness. For generations, people have been drawn to Alaska in search of adventure, independence, and opportunity. But behind that natural wonder is a social crisis often overlooked. Alaska's economy is heavily reliant on oil, gas, and fishing industries, which means that when those sectors suffer downturns, entire communities collapse. Over the last decade, the state has been losing residents steadily as young workers and families pack up in search of better job markets in the lower 48 states. For those who remain, life is incredibly expensive. Groceries, fuel, and basic necessities cost far more than in most parts of the country because almost everything must be imported. Add to that the extreme winters, where temperatures plunge well below zero, and homelessness becomes not just a struggle but a matter of survival. Tents, hidden in forests or makeshift shelters in Anchorage, become death traps during storms. Imagine facing that reality with no warm bed, no reliable heat, and no hope of immediate relief. Alaska's story shows how quickly the promise of opportunity can erode under economic dependence and geographic isolation. Now, shift your focus to Baltimore, Maryland, a city with a long history of industry, culture, and resilience. Yet, in recent decades, Baltimore has become a symbol of urban decline in America. More than a quarter of its population lives below the poverty line, and many neighborhoods are caught in a cycle of generational poverty. Once thriving factories have shut down, leaving job deserts across the city. Over 9,000 people in Baltimore are estimated to be homeless, and for many, survival means rotating between overcrowded shelters, temporary motel rooms, or cars parked on the side of the road. What makes Baltimore's crisis especially difficult is that it isn't confined to one neighborhood. It's spread across the city, making recovery a monumental challenge. Families with children, veterans, and even people with steady jobs are falling into homelessness as wages fail to keep up with housing costs. Walk through certain districts, and you'll find entire blocks of abandoned row houses, their windows shattered, their walls spray-painted, silent reminders of what used to be thriving communities. For residents, it raises the question, how did a city once central to America's growth become a case study in poverty? Then there is Hawaii, a place that on the surface seems like paradise. Tourists flock to its beaches, resorts, and volcanic landscapes in search of relaxation. But for locals, the reality is far from idyllic. Hawaii has the highest homelessness rate in the nation, and the reasons are clear. The cost of living is staggering. Renting even a modest apartment can consume nearly an entire paycheck, and grocery bills are among the highest in the country. Many Hawaiian families find themselves living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from losing their homes. What makes this crisis more visible than in other states is the geography itself. Homeless encampments are often set up in public spaces on beaches, in parks, or near highways because there's simply nowhere else to go. Tourists may see the postcard views, but many residents see the sharp divide between those who can afford the dream and those who are pushed into desperation. Hawaii's story highlights a painful contradiction. One of America's most beautiful states also carries one of its ugliest realities. Pennsylvania tells a different but equally troubling story, often remembered as the industrial heart of America, with steel mills and coal mines that powered the nation. Pennsylvania is now struggling with decline. The manufacturing jobs that once sustained entire towns have been vanishing for decades, leaving behind communities in economic freefall. Many families earn less than the national average, and with inflation rising, that gap becomes even more punishing. Small towns across the state face shrinking populations as younger generations leave in search of opportunity elsewhere. This exodus leaves behind aging populations, boarded up main streets, and schools struggling to stay open with fewer students. Homelessness may not be as visible in Pennsylvania's rural areas as it is in major cities, but it is quietly growing. Families double up in cramped apartments, children sleep in cars with their parents, and shelters in places like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are stretched to their limits. In Pennsylvania, the crisis isn't just about economics, it's about identity. A state that once built America now struggles to hold itself together. Even Las Vegas, Nevada, known worldwide for its glittering casinos, entertainment, and nightlife, hides a darker truth. Behind the neon lights are families living paycheck to paycheck, caught in the roller coaster of a tourism-driven economy. Nearly 15% of residents live below the poverty line, and homelessness affects more than 18,000 people in the city. Many end up in sprawling encampments in tunnels beneath the Strip or in makeshift shelters just outside the city limits. While tourists spend thousands of dollars in a single weekend, local families often struggle to pay rent. The problem is compounded by rapid population growth. As more people move to Las Vegas, housing costs soar, making it harder for low-income residents to compete. For many, a single missed paycheck can mean eviction. Las Vegas demonstrates the dangerous gap between illusion and reality, where the wealth on display masks the suffering that lies beneath. Louisiana offers another stark example of a state caught between resilience and hardship. Known for its music, food, and celebrations like Mardi Gras, Louisiana is also one of the poorest states in the country, with nearly 1 in 5 residents living below the poverty line. Natural disasters like hurricanes strike regularly, devastating communities and displacing families. Even years after major storms, some families have never fully recovered. In New Orleans, homelessness has been steadily rising, and shelters cannot keep up with demand. The combination of low wages, fragile infrastructure, and repeated disasters creates a cycle that is difficult to break. Families forced from their homes often move into overcrowded apartments or temporary shelters, while some end up on the streets. Louisiana's crisis shows how poverty is not just about money, it's about vulnerability to forces beyond people's control, from weather to policy to history. West Virginia tells a story of decline that feels especially tragic because of what it once represented. Known for its coal mines and the hard-working communities built around them, West Virginia was once an engine of America's growth. But as the coal industry collapsed under economic and environmental pressures, entire towns were left hollowed out. Jobs disappeared, families moved away, and what remained were communities struggling to reinvent themselves without the foundation that sustained them for generations. Drive through rural West Virginia today and you'll see abandoned houses, closed schools, and storefronts with faded signs. Reminders of a more prosperous past. The population is shrinking, and with fewer young people staying behind, the workforce is aging rapidly. But while housing here may be more affordable than in wealthier states, income levels are so low that even modest rents can feel out of reach. Shelters often report being overwhelmed, and more than 1,000 residents find themselves without a permanent home. Many relying on temporary solutions that only highlight the fragility of life in a state where opportunity has become scarce. For those who remain, the sense of being forgotten by the rest of the country is palpable, as if West Virginia has been left behind in the story of American progress. Illinois, often called the Land of Lincoln, faces a different but equally daunting set of challenges. For decades, Illinois was a magnet for families and businesses, anchored by Chicago's economic and cultural power. But in recent years, Illinois has become one of the fastest declining states in the country in terms of population. High taxes, government debt, and crumbling infrastructure have driven thousands of residents to pack up and leave. In 2023 alone, nearly 140,000 people left Illinois, adding to a trend that has been accelerating for years. Property taxes are among the highest in the nation, and the state's massive pension debts weigh heavily on public services. Meanwhile, more than 65,000 Illinois residents are homeless, struggling in shelters or on the streets. Chicago, once celebrated as a city of opportunity, now faces mounting crime, inequality, and the visible expansion of tent encampments. For many middle-class families, the decision to leave Illinois is not just about money, it's about a loss of faith in the state's ability to provide a secure future. The exodus continues, reshaping not only the state's demographics, but its very identity. California, the Golden State, may be the most striking example of decline in America today. For decades, California symbolized hope, innovation, and prosperity. Silicon Valley was the hub of technological progress. Hollywood, the center of global culture, and cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco glittered with opportunity. Yet, in recent years, California has been losing people at a record pace. More than 250,000 residents left in 2023 alone, citing the high cost of living, steep taxes, and unaffordable housing. The average home price in California hovers around $750,000, far beyond the reach of ordinary families. Renting a modest apartment can cost more than most people's monthly paycheck, forcing families into difficult decisions. Even large companies, once proud to call California home, have begun relocating operations to more affordable states like Texas and Nevada. But perhaps the most visible crisis in California is homelessness. With more than 170,000 people living without homes, California has the largest homeless population in the country. Walk through downtown Los Angeles or San Francisco, and entire city blocks are lined with tents, makeshift shelters, and people sleeping in doorways. These encampments have become a defining feature of the urban landscape, shocking visitors and frustrating residents who feel abandoned by policymakers. The California dream that once drew millions now feels unattainable for those struggling to survive. New York, long known as the gateway to opportunity, faces its own reckoning. For generations, immigrants and dreamers flocked to New York in search of better lives. The city that never sleeps stood as a beacon of possibility, its skyline symbolizing ambition and success. But today, the cost of living in New York is crushing. It is nearly 50% higher than the national average, and in cities like Manhattan, average monthly rent has soared to around $4,000. Families earning what would be considered solid incomes elsewhere find themselves struggling to pay for basic necessities here. Taxes are among the highest in the country, placing additional burdens on the middle class. In 2023 alone, nearly 180,000 residents left New York, moving to states with lower costs and fewer financial pressures. At the same time, New York has one of the largest homeless populations in the nation, with more than 90,000 people living without stable housing. Shelters are overfilled, streets are lined with encampments, and the gap between the wealthy elite and struggling workers has never felt wider. For many, the dream of building a life in New York is no longer realistic. It's a dream reserved for the wealthy, leaving everyone else to question whether the sacrifices are worth it. Taken together, these states reflect a broader American story, one in which opportunity is being replaced by instability and prosperity by survival. From the icy forests of Alaska to the crowded streets of New York, the challenges may look different, but the underlying issues remain the same: housing that is out of reach, wages that cannot keep up, and safety nets stretched thin. Millions of people find themselves caught in cycles of poverty and homelessness, not because they didn't work hard, but because the systems around them failed to provide security. What's more troubling is how normalized these crises have become. Tent encampments in wealthy states, boarded up towns in once thriving regions, and entire families living in their cars are no longer exceptions. They are part of the everyday reality. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that these stories from Alaska, West Virginia, Illinois, California, New York, and beyond are not isolated. They are pieces of a larger puzzler portrait of an America at a crossroads. Each state, whether rural or urban, wealthy or struggling, carries a version of the same struggle. People losing their footing in a nation that once promised stability. At its heart, this isn't just about numbers. It's about people. It's about the father in West Virginia who wants his children to inherit more than abandoned factories and empty storefronts. It's about the young woman in California who works 2 jobs yet still can't afford rent. It's about the grandmother in New York who worries every day that her Social Security check won't stretch far enough for both groceries and medication. These aren't just statistics, they're human stories, unfolding quietly behind the headlines. And yet, what makes this story even more urgent is how quickly decline can spread. One family leaves a neighborhood, then another. Businesses close their doors because there aren't enough customers. Schools shrink as fewer children enroll. Before long, entire communities begin to fade. Not because people didn't care, but because they were pushed out by forces beyond their control. This is how decline becomes self-reinforcing. The fewer who stay, the harder it is for those left behind to rebuild. But decline is not destiny. History shows us that America has weathered storms before. Cities like Detroit, once synonymous with collapse, are slowly finding new paths forward. Communities devastated by natural disasters or economic downturns have reinvented themselves through innovation, cooperation, and persistence. The lesson is clear. While decline can feel overwhelming, resilience is still deeply woven into the American story. The question we face now is not whether these states and cities can recruit it, whether the nation has the will to confront the structural problems that caused this crisis in the first place. Affordable housing, living wages, accessible healthcare, and investments in education are not luxuries. They are foundations of a society that wants to thrive. Without them, the cracks in our system will only deepen, pushing more families into poverty and more workers onto the streets. The American dream was never just about wealth, it was about stability, dignity, and the chance to build a life better than the one before. For millions today, that dream feels like it's slipping away. But acknowledging the depth of the crisis is the first step toward change. When people see what's happening in their own communities, when they realize that homelessness or economic decline isn't someone else's problem but part of a national pattern, then momentum for solutions begins to grow. So, where does this leave us? At a moment of choice, the next decade could see more decline, more families displaced, and more communities hollowed out. Or it could mark the beginning of a renewal one, where we recognize that leaving millions behind is not sustainable for any of us. Because in the end, a nation is only as strong as the people who call it home. And that's why this story matters. It's not just about statistics or headlines. It's about asking ourselves what kind of country we want to live in, and what kind of future we want to leave behind. Will we continue down a path where survival replaces opportunity? Or will we take the hard but necessary steps to rebuild a nation where the promise of the American dream is alive, not just for the few, but for all? That choice is ours, and it begins with awareness, conversation, and the courage to act.